All right, y'all. Y'all know what it is. Y'all know what time it is. It's Sunday. Takeaways with Tay, back in the flesh. On this, I ain't gonna lie, I'm losing track of time, losing track of the days, the dates. It's a lot going on. On this August 11th day of this Sunday, this is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. I hope you all are doing excellent. I hope you all are taking it easy this Sunday and enjoying family, friends, time to rest, all that, etc. Shout out to everybody that's in the live right now. Y'all like nice and early. We on time. So yeah, today's book is gonna be Outliers. So Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's a famous book. A lot of people have talked about it. Someone, I can't remember how I got into it, but it's a good read. Essentially, let's talk about Malcolm Gladwell. So, a little background on the author here. He's a Canadian journalist, public speaker, and author. And Outliers, for anyone who has never heard of this book, is all about the story of success. And it's like a research, it's kind of like a research piece of successful people in our society. So, like your Bill Gates, your top richest people in the world, your top athletes, your top singers, entertainers. It's a story, it's like a research piece compiling their journeys and how they got to where they were. And I don't want to say compiling their journey specifically because it's not focused on those individuals, but it uses the stories of those individuals to kind of create draw some similarities amongst them that helped propel them to success. So I think I think like where we should start here is just understanding what the definition of an outlier is according to Malcolm Gladwell. So basically, an outlier is anyone who has reached extraordinary heights in their career, in life, in a specific area. So for example, an Olympian, if we're looking at the Olympics right now, the people who are in the Olympics running, doing all the sports that they're doing, they're considered outliers. They're not your average Joe. They're not your average person. They follow a strict regime to get to where they have gotten. They've prepared for it. Another good example would be like Michael Jackson, right? Like he's not your everyday entertainer. He's not just a singer. He's not just there's so much about Michael Jackson that has made him this figure in music and in performing that has allowed him to be what we see as like the king of pop. Those are considered outliers. LeBron James, LeBron James is considered an outlier. He's a kid, an African American kid from a poor city, didn't have the resources, the family background, etc., the money, but still reached like very extraordinary heights. So when we're talking about outliers, we're talking about people who have become very successful in this lifetime. And yeah. So now, when we're talking about success, I think it's important to kind of distinguish between what makes someone successful, right? Now, success by society's definition, it requires, of course, power, status, money, impact, like influence, right? All of the people that I've mentioned previously, they all have influence. And so when we're talking about success, when the book is speaking on success, it's basically, thinking of it from that light of success. Like everybody has their own definition of what success means to them. But for the sake of the book and where we're going to be headed and focusing today, that's the type of success that we're talking about. Money, power, influence, and what else? Money, power, influence, resources, etc. So I think, and to kind of preface this a little bit more, I feel like the way that we as a society place successful people on a pedestal is dangerous, because, and this book is gonna defend that whole premise, right? because there are so many factors, right, that lead up to them being able to be in the area that they are in life. And when we place people on a pedestal, it's like we're looking at them as like God gave them special superpowers to carry out or to do whatever they are doing, and that we also don't have those same superpowers, or that there's something extraordinary about that person that allowed them to be in that area. And now, we're not discrediting talent and things like that, but just bear with me for a second, right? There's always something more to a person's success than just their talent and their God-given ability. And that's what Malcolm Gladwell's whole premise in this book is that we look at success as like an individual person, they were just super bad at, or not bad, for lack of better words. They were just really great at something, and then that's what caused them to be successful. But there are so many other factors that lead to success, like your environment, where you grew up, who your parents are, how much money your parents have given you, what is your inheritance, what particular period of the world did you grow up in, or what period of time of the world did you grow? What was the world going through at that particular time that allowed you to have this opportunity? What were some of the resources available to you? What were the little acts of, you can say, luck that led up to this experience? So that leads me to my first point, which is that you should be skeptical of self-proclaimed millionaires. Whenever someone says, I'm a self-made millionaire, I did this all by my lonesome, it was just me, da 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 da, I can't trust you, because I don't care how alone you felt like in your upcoming of being a millionaire. At some point, somebody had to open some type of door, had to present some type of opportunity, had to even see. You can't make money by yourself. There has to be another person on the receiving end, or the exchanging end. So like, no matter how much people say that they were self-made or that they did it by themselves, I don't believe it, because nobody can do anything by themselves. Most people can't. Most successful people, really all successful people, there's a network of individuals that they were able to tap into. Someone saw something in them, gave them an opportunity, and that opportunity allowed them to have experiences that other people might not necessarily have access to, or might not have been given those same experiences. And I mean, we're talking about once in a lifetime experiences, things that literally just by being exposed to them have the power to change the trajectory of someone's life. Something that you see, something that you hear, something that you are around, and if you're around it enough, it starts to spill over into you could say your DNA, and then now you're picking up on those practices. So that's why I feel like after reading this book, it really changed my viewpoint on how much I put people on pedestals, how much like successful people that I seem as successful in life, how much I had put them on pedestals in previous times, and like, oh, they're just godly, it's like, no, while they might also have like extraordinary talents, right, there were a lot of other things that played into their success. And I think it's, like I said, I think it's dangerous to put people on a pedestal because of their success without acknowledging all the other pieces, moving pieces that don't necessarily get the light. And I feel like as a society, especially Western society, we value stories. We value personal stories, personal narratives, almost like this hero story. Like we've romanticized a hero as someone who has all odds were stacked up against them, and they persevered and they got through it, and then they became this champion, and now they're living the dream, right? We do a great job of romanticizing the self-made millionaire, but I think that's dangerous because it rarely happens that way. And this book literally proves that with research. So there's non-obvious and unnatural factors that influence achievements, such as your environment, opportunity, luck, access, influences. All of that can have an effect, or does have an effect, on if you are an outlier or not, or if you're considered an outlier or not. Outliers often have invariably they're the beneficiaries of hidden advantages and extraordinary opportunities. So like I said, their parents might have a fortune that they then end up with. I'm going to use Batman because I love Batman now. I'm going to use him as an example. Although his parents died or they were killed when if everybody knows the story of Batman, when he was little, his parents got killed. And they left him with a business, a very successful business. And then they left him with a fortune, essentially. So because of that, he was able to take that fortune and become this big superhero, this Batman character that ends up saving Gotham City because he had the resources, because his family had already done the things to get them to the top. He didn't have to start from scratch and go get all these resources, secure funding and all that. He literally started with the perfect situation, if you will. And that allowed him to become Batman. It had given him the resources, given him the time to be able to do these things. So that's just, that's a more of a fictitious example. But if you want to go like real world, Malcolm Gladwell dives into the story of Bill Gates and how essentially, yes, Bill Gates is a very successful person. He is a billionaire. He's a billionaire. He's one of the richest men in the world, and he is exceptional at what he does, right? But there were a lot of things that led up to that. So there's a whole story on it, and I'm not going to go into the story because that's in the book, and if you want to read it, you can read it for yourself. But essentially, Malcolm Gladwell dives into the story of Bill Gates and talks about how there was a series of like almost luck of him just so happened to be at the right place at the right time, going to the right school, being his parents being able to afford the school. There was something that happened at the school where it opened up the door for something else to occur, and then something else occurred, and then he drops out of Harvard, and that just so happened to be the time where it all plays like a bit, like all these little pieces play a role in the bigger picture. And like I said, you can dive into it for yourself and really look at the facts of it. But yes, Bill Gates is a billionaire, but there were so many things that led up to him. So many things outside of his control. That's the key. So many things outside of his control that he had absolutely nothing to do with, but just literally being in the right place at the right time, being born to the right people, and having the right resources, right? He had absolutely nothing to do with it, and he was able to benefit from that. So there is this thing called the Matthew effect, which is what Malcolm Gladwell says is like it's like if you have an advantage, or when like at an early age, if you have an advantage, because you have an advantage, you're most likely to get access to more resources and more opportunities to expand upon that advantage, whether it be in sports, education, the arts, whatever the case may be, business. If you have an advantage, you're most likely to have more advantages in life because that advantage is going to put you in places and expose you to other opportunities, as opposed to if you don't. And if you don't, basically you're gonna continue to be in places that lack the opportunity, the experiences that come along, or that could propel you to advance in whatever it is that you want to advance in. And so Malcolm uses the 2007 Medicine Hat Tigers roster. So he's going, like I said, he's Canadian. So, excuse me. He uses a Canadian hockey team to kind of prove this point. And the hockey team that he chooses is the 2007 Medicine Hat Tigers roster. So he's looking at the roster, right? And he's noticing, he's looking at the roster to try to figure out, like, what are some similarities amongst this group of people on this roster, and what kind of conclusions could he draw? And he found that from January to March, 40% of the people on the roster, they were born between January and March. 30% were born between April and June. 20% were born between July and September. And 10% were born between October and December. Now, the interesting thing is that in Canada, the eligibility cutoff for age class hockey is January 1st. So, one more time. The cutoff for hockey in Canada, right? The age class hockey, the cutoff is January 1st. So if your birthday is on January 2nd, if you turn 10 on January 2nd, you could be playing hockey against someone who is 9. So that gives you an advantage, a 365-day advantage, a whole year advantage in terms of maturity, physical maturity over the child that, let's say, was born, their birthday is not until the end of the year, so they're not going to be turning 10 until December. Whereas opposed, you're already 10 January 2nd. So basically with that, he found that in elite groups, right, an elite group of hockey players, the best of the best are born between January and March. And that literally, he found that like synonymous with almost every elite hockey team, is that the best of the best were literally like, I'm talking about play by play, like what they were actually doing on the I don't know what you call the hockey, is it hockey field or the ice? I don't know. I don't know anything about hockey. But what these players were doing during the game, it was like he broke it down to like, he didn't call them by their names, he called them by their birthdays. So he was like, January 2nd passes to January 3rd shoots for the goal. February 22nd blocks it. March 3rd comes down. Like, and it was like crazy because it's like, dang, the top players, people that was making most of the plays, were literally born between January and March, which is crazy when you think about it. And he also found that synonymous with like soccer, a lot of different sports where like there's a cutoff date for eligibility. If your birthday falls directly after that cutoff date, you have a whole year advantage over all the other people. And so that's what he calls the Matthew effect, or that's known as the Matthew effect, which is that when you have an advantage, you basically get more of an advantage because of that. Once you're considered the elite, or you're in that, I guess you could say, that January through March group, physically you're already superior. So because of that, you're already getting more looks. Naturally, you're just getting more looks from coaches. You're getting more attention. You're getting more, you're just getting a lot more because of your physical superiority to your peers. And then because of that, you're getting exposed. So you're getting access to other opportunities to expand upon that, to grow upon that, to become better. And it really didn't have anything to do with your actual ability. It's just that you just so happen to be bigger and more capable than someone who's literally not turning 10 until the next year or a couple more months later. So let's see, that's also known as ability grouping in early childhood. And it happens in schools too. You know, if you're born, I believe school starts in like fall, so like, or end of summer, so like August and like late August, and or sometimes early August, depending on where you are. But basically, you know, if you start school, let's say your birthday is right after school starts, most likely you're considered an older child, because let's say you have to be 5 years old to start school. If your birthday isn't until like October, like me, I turned 6 when I started kindergarten. So like naturally I had an advantage over other students who were maybe 5, and etc. So it applies to all different areas of life. Um, but yeah, so second point here is that we are too much in awe of those who succeed and far too dismissive of those who fail, who we think fail. And Malcolm does a good job of like talking about how as a society, how society determines who makes it essentially. Um, because like I said, you can't, there's not, it's not just a one man show. You, as much as we want to romanticize the whole self-made millionaire story, there's always somebody else on the other end that has to kind of approve of this, you know, like kind of like says, all right, you know, yeah, we're going to give so and so the shot this time, or we're going to give this person the shot this time. And it's like they've already decided who they're going to pick for whatever. And so but also too, like if you have like a platform, like let's say Kai Cenat, he did something different where he goes live and he does the whole streaming, gaming, whatever. People had to like him. People had to like his personality. People had to be able to connect with him in order for him to be where he is right now. He didn't just get on live and just people just like, somebody had to see him. Somebody had to watch his video and be like, oh, wow, this is very engaging. This is very entertaining. I want to keep watching this, in order to be able to put him in a place of being able to, you know, create a whole life off of what he does. Another good example would be Keith Lee. He does the food critics. He does the reviewing of the food. It's like he gives reviews, but people had to actually value those reviews. They had to actually listen to them and trust them in order for him to be able to build a platform off of that. So it's a two-way street. And so I think like as a society, knowing that we can be more intentional about who we give these pedestals to, or who we put into positions of power. And like we're in a political season right now, and I don't want to get too political, but just going off of that, like we put people in positions to pay. We vote based upon what we look at, what we're seeing, what we encourage, what we value, right? So like understanding that you have power as an individual, and to society collectively, we have a power of who we actually decide to kind of let lead in certain areas and ultimately be outliers, right? Because all the people that I mentioned previously, they're considered outliers. So last point here is that our communities and cultures also influence our ability to succeed. So there was an example that Malcolm Gladwell gave in the book. He uses Harlan in Kentucky. And Harlan was known for coal mining. So it's a city in Kentucky that was known for coal mining. But they were also known for using violence and intimidation to maintain their power. So essentially, yes, they were great at coal mining. They probably made a lot of money for the city and were respected in that field. They did it through force, and it kind of created this vicious cycle where people normalized a pattern of obeying aggressive leaders and remaining poor. And with that, like different communities that people live in play a role on how they see the world. They shape how we see the world. So if we live in a community where aggression or gang violence is hyperalized, I don't even know if that's a word, hyperalized. It's a if where it's prominent, we'll say where it's prominent, we're most likely to participate in that. Statistically speaking, and just from a sociological standpoint, we're more likely to participate in gang violence or aggressive behavior because we've grown up in those environments, or we've seen them. And I think this is interesting because I'm African American, obviously. And so I related to African American communities and how African American communities are where sometimes they're food deserts. They lack resources, or oftentimes they're food deserts. They lack resources. They lack the education. They lack the role models, in a sense of business acumen, financial role models, good influences, right? Because you can be a role model, but it might not necessarily be a positive influence. And because of that, there's often this cycle of what you see is what you do. So if you see drug dealing and everybody just kind of like hanging out, wasting time, sitting on the porch, not doing nothing, drinking, there's a certain type of lifestyle. Like there's this hood mentality, and there's a certain type of lifestyle that people who live in the hood most likely abide by, right? And what's interesting is that as a community, we can't necessarily, I don't think it's right to blame other people for that state as a community. I think it's important to realize the state and to figure out how we can even out the playing field. Because right now, as a community, we're at an extreme disadvantage, from home ownership to a lot of things, families, communities. Like we're at extreme disadvantage when we're talking about in regards to whites, Indians, and what else? We'll just leave it there. And that's by design. That's a whole nother conversation, but that's by design. But naturally, right, because of that, we are already behind. And so, is this, for me, it's like this book kind of sparks a conversation of how do we get ahead? How do we figure out if in order to be an outlier, you have to have kind of extraordinary experiences and opportunities. And most of the people that look like me come from communities where the access to that is, or access to those opportunities and those experiences and those people and those influences are kind of like lacking. Not kind of, but they're lacking. So I think that in order for things to change, right, I heard this thing where somebody said the revolution has to be financed. So people have to care enough to make a change and actually finance that change, because nothing happens without money, especially in America. And in a world that runs off of capital, I believe that money is a catalyst that we can use to transform our communities, but also money to help transform our minds and like how we see the world, because that's where really the real change is going to come from. But also when it comes to being an outlier, the good thing is that just from reading this book, I feel like everybody is an outlier in some capacity. It just takes you examining your life and realizing what unique experiences, opportunities, exposure, and all those things. What were those unique things for you, and how can you make it work for whatever it is that you would like in life? So, and like only you know that. Only you know the experiences that you've gone through and the environments that you've been placed in. But certain environments can be like golden for you becoming like a mogul in your field. Like there's certain things that all play a role that could have propelled you to being a superstar. You just got to figure that out. You have to figure out what makes you an outlier. What environments, what situations, what circumstances make you an outlier. And what does it say? Oh, and also, like, if you, let's say you're like well past the energy to even consider being an outlier, right? But if you have an offspring, you can position them to be outliers. So oftentimes the outliers that we see in the world, they had an advantage because their parents had a vision for their life. So let's use Michael Jackson as an example. Michael Jackson was a kid And his dad literally, it's controversial. He forced him to, not forced him. They there was a strict practicing regime, right? He wasn't allowed to be a kid. That's a fact. He couldn't go and do what other kids do, right? He was always practicing. He was always rehearsing. He was always singing, perfecting his voice, perfecting his craft. He put in well over 10,000 hours to become Michael Jackson, right? But also it was encouraged by his father's vision for him and his brothers and his sister Janet. You know, he had a vision, like, this is what you're going to do. And he was threatened to do that, you know. I'm not saying that that's a great way of parenting, but did Michael benefit? I mean, we can say he did, but also I think he can only, God rest his soul, he's the only one that can say that. But I say all this to say that a lot of times parents influence the vision for their child. And, or not a lot of times, oftentimes parents' vision. And if you don't have a vision for your child, then your child is going to have that gives them the opportunity to have a vision for themselves, and then you just support it. But you know, if you have a vision for your child, you want your child to be be at a certain level in math, you're going to put them in positions and places, if you have access, to be able to be a mathematician or be able to be smart in math or be more knowledgeable in those areas. And certain cultures do it all the time. Like Chinese cultures, there's this whole stereotype that Chinese people are great at math. And I teach Chinese students firsthand, so I've been able to see this. And I wouldn't say that they're great at math. Like, don't get me wrong. But also, their parents have them in math class literally at like 3-4 years old. They're learning basic arithmetic, computation, number sense at very early ages. That is the essential foundation for them to be able to be what we consider math wizards. So yes, they're great at math, but they have practiced this since they were like 2 or 3. Not because a 2 and 3-year-old wants to practice math, but because their parents was like, you're going to practice math, regardless if you like it or not. And I'm going to put you in a program that helps you practice math. And I'm like I said, I've seen this firsthand. They will pay to put their children in overachieving programs so that their children can be overachievers in certain areas. So, and it's essentially the parents are responsible for a lot of times, most of the time, their child being an outlier. I'm not going to put it all on the parent, but you can't just look at a child and say they're just this whatever because life just put everything in their favor. God just favored them. They're so lucky. There's so many factors, right? If you don't take anything else from this, after reading this book, there's so many factors that play into success. And hopefully anyone who feels like they're not successful in life, they can hear these things and understand that a lot of times, there are things that are out of your control that also influence success to a certain degree. And once again, I established the definition of success that we're using today for this particular topic as power, influence, money. Whatever success looks like for you and what you deem as successful, how you know you've been successful in life, that's a whole nother story. But I would challenge you to, like, if you feel like you're a failure, like you feel like you didn't reach whatever you thought you were supposed to reach by now, I would challenge you to rethink that and rethink the truth in that. And then also focus on, everything that you could control to get to where you wanted to get. Did you control it? What was your role in that? And before you kind of like blame yourself or put shame or, whatever the case may be, because it's important to know that success is not just a one person thing. And I think that's what we kind of got to get out of and realize. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, the book goes into a lot of research, and it compares a lot of the top, I think it's like the top 75 richest people in the world. It looks for comparisons amongst them. It notices some similarities amongst that. And just understanding that success is there's a lot more luck. There's a lot more of the things that true, like big success. Once again, because I'm like, success can look different for everybody, but what we're talking about in terms of our definition, the definition that I said earlier, in terms of that success, there's so many things that play into that outside of your control. And understanding that, but also learning how to navigate a world that essentially that's what it is. Like that's how you can or cannot get to success is based upon things that are outside of your control. So navigating that world, helping your offspring navigate that world, or whoever navigate that world, I think that's the biggest takeaway here from this book. And just be careful about who you place on a pedestal. But also I'm curious to know, like, what are you guys' suggestions in terms of how we can even out the playing field? So like, if there is, because a lot of society still runs on these, cutoff dates, and school starts at this age, or school starts at this part of the calendar year, but then there's a disadvantage for those born, let's say earlier in the year. Like, there's so many things. Like, but what do you think we can do as a society? Or we can just start with the African American community, because there's definitely an unlevel playing field. But what can we do to even that playing field out and put ourselves in positions to be outliers? And even if you want to be, like, this is just assuming that you actually want to be an outlier. If you don't want to be an outlier, more power to you. There's so many other things in the world to be focused on. But this has been another episode of Takeaways with Tay. I think we are like a quarter of a way. Well, I think we're like almost on our midway point now to making it to a full year of doing this. So I'm enjoying it. I'm learning a lot. I hope you all are have been able to take away some really good points, whether it been financial, education, relationships, all of the topics that we touched on thus far. I hope you've been able to get something from it, because that was my purpose for creating this, to be able to give something, share something with someone, and regardless of if they read the book or not, you can still gain something from these insights, these takeaways, and apply them to your life, or share it with somebody that you think it might be useful to. So definitely like, comment, share, continue to tune in. Thank you all for tuning in, especially on this Sunday when you could have been doing anything else. And we will be back next Sunday, inshallah. And I hope you all have a great start to your week. We are going to go ahead and hit the end button on this. So I'll see y'all.